Parasite Eve is a PlayStation 1 game that is initially meant to be a sequel to a book written in Japan by somebody from the pharmaceutical medical field industry. This person clearly had inside knowledge as to all of the sciencey stuff and put that into his book. The book I have not read. It was translated into English, but apparently the geniuses who run books apparently thought, you know what? We could hope for this as a Kindle book, but no, let's not make more hard copies of this. Let's not do that. That would be too smart. So let's stop doing that. We're only going to offer it on an ebook. But to anybody who likes hard copies, so we're going to say, you can't have this paperback. If you want it, though, we did make some years and years ago. So you can buy a used hard copy for over $100. But if you don't wish to spend that exorbitant amount of money, well, you're just SOL. Sorry about that. And that is why I haven't read Parasite Eve, the book, that translated into English. I'm pretty sure, more than pretty sure, that in Japan, they are continuing to print that book in Japanese. But in English, we're just not that lucky. They apparently think that people don't like reading physical books, so they just decided not to print any more copies. Even though you could pull a KDP publishing house type of thing where you print on demand. You buy the copy pays for the printing of the copy and the shipping out of that copy once it has been manufactured. But apparently they decide they don't want to do that either. So there's no English hard copy currently in print physically. You can buy the ebook if you want. I don't want to. But this game is a sequel to that book. And we do have enough references to that book to figure out what's happened in that book in this game. There was an incident in Japan, and that incident led to it being spread to New York at the setting of this game. And that is all you really need to know about that book. Even though the book is very smart and technically with all that techno-medical stuff, then they do have a lot of lectures from very smart people in cutscenes in this game for you to learn about a lot of real studies, such as I think it was called the Noble Cell or something about that. The Noble Cell, the Mitochondrial Eve project, and all this other stuff besides. All this smart stuff that's actually real studies and real articles that you could look up. So I appreciated that. In case they didn't explain something properly, I could just look up the actual study. And I actually did for one of them, the Mitochondrial Eve thing, which was a study about studying all the chondrialness of the DNAs and stuff to source all humankind to a single woman in Africa, which determines that this person is the mitochondrial Eve, the first human female, the biblical Eve terminology being the inspiration for the name of the mitochondrial Eve. So as to say, I guess mitochondrial Adam was the person who propagated the next. But usually with the chondrialness, it is a feminine thing. It is in the feminine thing, and that is what is passed down to the child, which is why the male counterpart in the breeding process, according to this game, is not as important as the female feminine aspect of the breeding process. And confused, yet I don't blame you. I'm not exactly good at delivering sciencey jargon that I'm not reading directly off of a script, which I'm currently not doing. As in, I'm not reading off of a script written with medical jargon. I'm just recalling it off the top of my head. which means I'm doing terrible. But the game itself, outside of all that medical jargony confusingness, is very fun. It is a action active time based free roaming type of battle system where you get a top down view. What's the best analogy I can make graphically? Graphics wise, it's closer to Final Fantasy VIII. So if you've played Final Fantasy VIII, you know what I'm talking about. In that time period, with the whole PlayStation controller here, you're looking at a PlayStation 3 controller here, but back in the old-timey days, they usually did not have these little things called analog sticks. You would just have the D-pad, and these 4 buttons here, and these 2 buttons here, and the R1, R2, L1, L2 buttons here on the side as well. So you wouldn't have these analog sticks. And so they normally would not program any button mapping to these. They would eventually retroactively map them to these. To my knowledge, I believe Parasite Eve 1 was made or designed phase prior to the release of these types of analog controllers. Analog controllers, I believe, were released in 1997. I could be wrong, but I think I'm not. In 1997, the analog stick controllers were pushed out, and a lot of older games were retrofitted button mappingly wise to just have the D-pad be transferred over if you had an analog stick controller plugged in. For Parasite Eve 1's purposes, it was kind of messed up. It was a little bit messed up. You see, digitally, when you're playing a PS1 classic on your PlayStation 3, you have 2 controller modes. It's called a digital mode and an analog mode. Analog mode, naturally, is the analog controller, so you get to use the analog sticks to use your button mappings if that game has analog. Analog compatibility. Some games do not have this, such as the very first Gex game. The very first Gex game does not have analog support, so you were stuck to using the 4 directional D-pad keys. Parasite Eve 1 does have analog support. If you put it to digital, you could use your button mappings. You can move your character in 8 directions: up, down, left, right, northwest, southwest, east, west, blah blah blah. You could do those 4 cardinal directions, so you would not have full circular rotational control that you would have with an analog stick. The problem is, if you were to set your controller to analog mode while playing the PS1 Parasite Eve game, they moved everything onto the left analog stick. What does that mean? It means normally when you navigate a menu, when you go press the up and down keys to navigate a menu with more precise precision, that don't happen. When you plug in the analog mode, there is no button mapping to the D-pad anymore. It's gone. If you press these, your character will not move. You cannot navigate the menus or anything using the D-pad keys. You were stuck to navigating the menu and your character on the map using just the analog stick. Well, if your analog stick is a little bit old, like mine is, if you're playing on a PS1, natural PS1, the analog stick is probably definitely pretty old, they tend to get stuck. They tend to get stuck, usually pointing upwards. If I were to open this thing up, I'm not going to do that on screen, but if I were to open this controller up and remove this little casing thing, and the little nub beneath this little protective casing would be pointed in the up direction. I could push it back to the center, but then it would just stick back upwards. It is because of this little rubber thingamajiggy that it is slightly pushed down towards the center position, but it is still currently a little bit upwards. So if you were to use one of those little handy dandy little controlly little techno-babbly machines to determine if an analog stick is in the perfect center position. They do have very, very sensitive rotational sensitivities. If I just pushed slightly down here, this analog stick is registering. Just barely. I'm just barely touching it. You probably can't even see that with this low resolution, but I'm barely touching this. And some games, if they have enough sensitivity with the analog sticks, they will register movement with that. That's how, when you're playing like one of those little games where you're just gently pushing it, your character walks, but if you push hard enough, your character runs. That's how sensitive these little analog stick nubbies are. So the menu navigation was always like, if I try to push down with this, the little selector button thing. How do I show this? Let's say we have your little thing right here. Let's go with a little menu here. We have menu. We're just gonna write down menu, item, equip, bonus, and setting. I'm just going to write down 5 random words here, okay? So with these 5 random words, let's say your cursor is initially on this upward position. If I pressed down on this analog stick and go down here, because this analog stick is slightly to the north, sometimes after you go down, it just goes right back up. You press down again, and it goes right back up. You press down, then you hold it, and it'll stay. You press down again, you can go there again. But since a lot of these older controllers are starting to stick, you'll have a lot of problems using this to navigate menus, especially if the menu cursors are very sensitive. So what I found myself doing was I had to keep switching to digital mode, which is the version of the controller that did not have analog sticks during the PS1 era. I was able to use the menus with the D-pad. And then I would switch back to analog mode when I need to move my character of Brea, using the analog stick for full rotational free range character movement. Are you with me so far? I know I'm being very confusing. I'm gonna be moving this away now. Well, actually, no, I can leave this here for another rant. I was gonna save this for the Parasite Eve 2 rant, but you know what? I'm gonna bring it up here. In Parasite Eve 2, there's a major difference in movement. In Parasite Eve 1, you could push this cursor in this position, like going to the right, and your character would run to the right. It makes sense, right? You press right, and your character moves right. Yes? Yes. Well, in Parasite Eve 2, if you press this analog stick to the right, your character stays put. He just turns to the right. Your character will only move if you push up, and then they'll run in the direction. So if you push right, your character turns this way, then you push the up button, they'll run in that static direction. This can be potentially incredibly irritating for people who do not like this control system and view it to be completely pointless and arbitrary, as I do. We have 2 analog sticks here, and button mapping is only stuck to a single analog stick. This type of control mapping is usually meant for the D-pad, but Parasite Eve 2 was created in 1999. Released in 1999, though it had to have been in development after the release of the analog support controller, which came out in 1997. So within that 2-year period, I believe this game was created, so it could have been made with analog support initially. But, surprisingly, it was not. It was made with the D-pad initially, intentionally, for you to use the D-pad for it. It's called tank controls. Anyone who plays PS1 games back in the 90s knows what tank controls are. Some people really like it. I absolutely loathe tank controls. I loathe them. Loathe. L-O-A-T-H-E. I hate tank controls. I do. You see, I am of the group that believes that when you push the analog stick in the right direction, your character should run right. Doesn't matter which way you're facing. If you change the little static direction, you press right, you're moving right. Eh? That's what I believe in. I don't believe in this tank control system. Though, there have been some that have used analog support. Parasite Eve 2 has analog support for your tank control systems, but it just puts the button mappings of the D-pad onto the left analog stick. I personally believe you should have switched it between both analog sticks, as in the left and the right movement keys that rotate your character left or right is put onto the right analog stick to move this way or this way to turn your character. And then this one with the up or the down being to move forward or to move backwards. That way you can, you can turn and pivot while you're running. It's such a surprising and an incredible little thing that instead of going in a singular direction, you could veer in a different one. That's what I love about free-range movement. You could move in a full circular direction at any time. It is such an incredible thing. It is an amazing thing. The ability to veer in a direction easily without any sort of stoppageness, to rotate your character like a robot, is one of the greatest things to have. And the very first Parasite Eve game had free range movement in and outside of combat. So you will love to have your free range movement here, but if you end up playing the second Parasite Eve, know that the support for the analog stick is just transferring the button mappings of the D-pad onto the left analog stick rather than splitting it up properly between both analog sticks to turn left and right using the right analog stick, and to go up and down movement wise using the left analog stick. This is my personal core belief, is how tank control should be split when you're doing it analog wise. You split both D-pad directions between both analog sticks to have more of a free range kind of movement, because it's kind of difficult to really move in a proper way when you have both the rotational directions and the ups and the downs on a single analog stick, because if you move it just slightly too far to the left or too far to the right, she will stop moving and turn, and then you have to press forward again, and it's just so annoying. It's so pointless. It really is. Especially when you realize when she aims the button, when the aiming button is the square button. So when you go into combat stance but you press the square button, she will stop moving regardless. So you can just turn and pivot her that way. So the stoppageness of movement with the tank controls is arbitrary and pointless, in my opinion. If you like it, that's great. I despise it. But luckily, the first Parasite Eve does not have tank controls. But in order to save myself 30 minutes of ranting in the inevitable Parasite Eve 2 video, I wanted to rant briefly about it here to save and split the time up, because most of my rage in Parasite Eve 1 is only for two things. I already mentioned one of them being the analog support issue. The other one is a place called the Chrysler Building. So part 2 of the raging for Parasite Eve is the Chrysler Building. This game has 2 endings. You could play the game normally from start to finish and get an ending. You'll have an ending, and it's usually satisfying for most cognitively normal people. But for completionists who are absolutely insane, they want that complete file. They want to see as much as they can. So they will go into the Chrysler Building, which is a bonus dungeon for what this game's version of New Game Plus offers. You go into this building and realize that it is 70 floors of pure nightmare horror, bad, mapless, nightmare-inducing horror. I cannot begin to describe how horrible, not horrifying, but horrible this place is. Every floor looks exactly the same. You have no maps. You have to navigate 10 floors. So every floor has an elevator that you can go to once you acquire a key. You have a key after you defeat the boss floor. So let's turn our little handy-dandy little note thing over and write down such little rules about the Chrysler Building. We have floors 1 through 10, 11 through 20, 21 through 30, 31 through 40, 41 through 50, 51 through 60, and 61 through 70. Every time you complete 10 floors, you will get a boss floor on the 10th floor of every 10th, 20, 30, 40, etc. And you have to fight this boss, and the boss will drop a key. That key will allow you to return to 1 to 10 of that floor. So if you beat the boss at the 20th floor, you can use that key to go from floor 20 all the way down to floor 1 if you wish. There are no save points in the entirety of the Chrysler Building, implying that you have to play through all 10 floors, though you do not have to if you wish not to. If you instead you felt like by the time you reached the 8th floor, you needed to go save your game, and you didn't wish to go to the 9th and then the 10th floor, beat the boss and get the key, and then fast travel down to the 1st floor to leave the building and go save your game at another location that has a save point, you could then turn around on the 8th floor and go back down to the 7th, then the 6th, 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and 1st floor, leave, find your save point, and come back and realize that all of the floors have re-randomized themselves. Because there are no maps for the Chrysler Building, because every floor is randomized, and because every floor is randomized, you have to just figure it out yourself. Normally, the size of each floor in the Chrysler Building is roughly about the size of a floor in the museum, the final dungeon, per se, in the main story of Parasite Eve, PS1. You have a total of 6 days in the game. You have a total of 7 dungeons. We have the first dungeon being the Opera House at the Carnegie Building, which is very, very small. It's just a hallway with some doors to the side. That's it. The second dungeon is the Central Park, which is a little bit more less centralized, but you just have a little winding path with some doors on the side, instead of just one straight path. The single floor of Central Park and the Carnegie Building combined do not even count as the size of a single floor in the Chrysler Building. It is that big, each floor, and it would take that long to navigate a single floor. I averaged it would take about an hour to an hour and a half to navigate each 10 floors to reach the boss, fight the boss, get the key, go back to the nearest elevator, and go down to the 1st floor, and leave, save the game, come back. It would take roughly about an hour to an hour and a half each time. So, If you're one of those players who usually just plays for half an hour to an hour every night before you go to bed or something like that, this place is not going to be fun for you. Because if you think, oh, it took me 40 minutes to do 1 through 10, I might be able to do it. No. You have to dedicate, at the very least, an hour and a half if you plan to do the Chrysler Building. It'll take you at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days total, because there's 7 floors after the 7th floor, 70th floor. But, there's another boss fight after this from the 71st to the 77th floor, which is very small, but the boss fight is going to be taking you the most time. So you're going to be needing to dedicate another night to just do that. And there's no cutscenes or story on any of floors 1 through 76. The only story that you're going to get is on the 77th floor. On the 77th floor, you get to encounter the original Eve mitochondrial thing that has shapeshifted itself into Aya's sister's body. And Aya's sister's consciousness still exists within this mitochondria, and that this mitochondria entity has allowed Maya to talk with her sister for a little bit before you have to fight for a lengthy amount of time, because it is the hardest boss in the game. Once you have defeated this boss, you get the true ending until they made a sequel. The true ending can only be viewed by doing this nightmare, inducing hellhole that is the Chrysler Building. So if you do not wish to spend roughly the same amount of time on this singular dungeon that has no variation every 10 floors, it's just the exact same look, the exact same design, the exact same copy and pasted floors, just in new labyrinthine layouts, every floor with no variation, with no breaks, with no story in it, just an endless. If you don't want to do that, then I just implore you to go onto YouTube and look up the true ending and view it that way. Because if you just want the ending and you don't want to do this, just do that. But if you do want to do this, then learn that there are four constants on every floor. You have an entrance, you have an exit, you have an elevator, and you have a storage closet. In the storage closet on every single floor is where you get your treasures. In these rooms, you can find plenty of tools, you can find plenty of super tools, you can find ammo, you can find healing items, you can find weapons, you can find all a good menagerie sort of stat boost increasing items, like for example, for your guns. What's the best way I could explain this game mechanic? Alright. You have a basic gun, right? Let's say we have pistol. On our pistol, we have some attribute stats, much like a character has stat points in their attack, defense, and all that stuff. We have the pistol's overall offense. We have the pistol's overall ammo capacity. And we have the pistol's overall range. The higher the range, the farther away you can hit your target for maximum damage. Normally, in combat, you will find that you have this little square area, right? But let's say Aya is standing right here, and the enemy is standing right here, right? If you have a pistol with maybe 50 range, let's just write down 50, then your damage, if you just stay in that spot right here, this one right here, your damage would be roughly in this radius, which means you will have to move your character slightly in this direction to stand right here in order for your radius to then be able to hit him for full damage. Because if you try to attack him from here to reach here, then standing outside of this circle, you will miss your fire. You will miss your attack. And if you land it, it will deal minuscule to no damage at all. The higher the range, the bigger the circle will be. And that explains itself, right? Your ammo capacity should explain itself, right? If your ammo capacity is 6, your gun will only be able to fire a total of 6 times before your character has to stop and reload. While they are reloading their gun, they are vulnerable to attack and cannot be moved. So the enemy can attack you while you're doing this. You do not want to reload your gun if you can avoid it in battle. Offense, it should be self-explanatory, right? Let's say if your offense is 80, and you fire your gun, you'll deal at least 80 damage or something, right? And then we have these little attributes at the bottom. You have these little bonus things, these little squares here, right? Let's say item up is one of them. A gun with these stats with an item up attribute on it means if you equip this gun, your inventory slot will go up by 1 point, which means if your max total inventory is 20, it will be 21 when you equip this gun. Does that make sense? It should. That's what these attributes are for. At the bottom, you can increase these attributes using tools. So, for example, if there is a gun with this item up on it, and you want to move item up onto another gun, like say, let's call this one rifle. We're just going to call it rifle. And its range is 150. Its damage is 100. Its capacity is 35. But it has no little attribute thingamajiggies at the bottom. It has no skills. So you can use a thing called a tool. You can use a tool item, which is picked up in dungeons wherever you wish to find them. They are disposable items. You use a tool to transfer either bonus abilities, we're gonna bonus stat points. We're gonna talk about that next, or abilities. So you can use a tool to move this onto here, which will dispose of this item in your inventory, but you will keep this item with the added ability onto it. Or you could transfer bonus stats. We're going to talk about that next. Let's say in the storage room of one of these floors you find an offense up +4. Let's say you'll find it at floor like 23 or something. The offense +4 can be applied to your pistol, and it would move its damage up to 84. The weapon itself is still base 80 damage, but it now has a +4 modifier applied to this gun. They keep track of all of the modifiers. They stack up over and over. Let's say you find like 3 offense +4s throughout these dungeons, and you boost this up by an extra 12 points, going from 80 to 92. You can then use a tool to move the bonus points from this onto this gun here. And then by doing that, you could transfer 12 extra offense points, the 3 offense up +4s that you applied to this gun, onto this gun. And then it will dispose of this gun. You won't be able to transfer the abilities over unless you use something called a super tool, which I believe can help transfer some extra things over without disposing of one or the other. I haven't messed with the super tools all that much. I've messed with tools plenty of times. Super tools, you'll figure that out as you play. But that's the general gist of how you mess with your guns in Parasite Eve. That's your ability up system. Every time you level up, your HP and your item capacity can also go up. Your item capacity, let's talk about item capacity real quick. Do I have any backs here? This one has a back here. Let's say you start the game and your capacity is 7. That means you can only carry 7 items total in your entire inventory. Let's say you got your gun, you got your armor, you got your ammo, and that means you only got 4 healing items. That's complete total maximum item capacity. But let's say you find a key in one of the rooms in the Carnegie building on day 1 of Parasite Eve. You already have maximum capacity. You have to get rid of one of your items to carry this key that will open another door in the Carnegie building. So you have to keep track of that. It's much like a survival horror game in regards to very, very limited item capacity, which makes for an arbitrarily tedious inventory management that I honestly feel isn't really needed, but it's there. You can upgrade the item capacity using bonus points, upon which you usually obtain upon leveling up or completing the game. These bonus points can increase your item capacity level from either 1 to 99. This does not mean you can carry 99 items. No, the maximum item capacity once you have reached 99 will be 45. Now, how does that work? Well, after a certain number of levels you have gained with your item capacity, every further level in item capacity from 1 to 99 decreases the statistic percentage applied to a full point for your item capacity. For example, if you have reached level 20, if you go to level 21, your item capacity would be 20.5. Going to level 22, your inventory capacity will now be 21. Going to level 23, it'll be 21.5. And then once you get up to like level 70, your inventory could be like 36. And once you go to 71, it'll be 36.3. 72, 36.6, etc. The percentage decreases for how much of a full point of item capacity the higher your level goes. So you'll end up with just 45 by the time you've maximized your item capacity, and I always found myself full of inventory, completely full inventory. No matter where I went, I had full inventory because I'm such an unbelievable pack rat, and items don't stack. So you could have like 5 healing items and you'll take 5 slots instead of just seeing you get a recovery 2. We're going to call it recovery 2. Right? Let's say you have a recovery 2, which is stronger than recovery 1 but weaker than recovery 3. Let's say you pick up 4 recovery 2s instead of going to your inventory and you see recovery 2 times 4 taking up a single slot. Instead, you will get 4 recovery 2s. Just 4 inventory slots. 1, 2, 3, 4 of just recovery 2s. Just boom, 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 boom. It'll just take up an individual slot each time. If this annoys you, like it does me, you will probably get a little bit of an annoyance out of that. But if you don't pack rat like I do, and you usually tend to manage a very small inventory, then this will not bother you at all. If you're used to survival horror games, this won't bother you at all, especially if you're used to PS1 survival horror games with incredibly limited inventories. The story, though, outside of all of this, the story by itself is excellent. It is a fantastic story, and I do think that they do a fantastic job of making this a wonderful spiritual sequel to a book I've never read. The characters are very small in number. You have Aya Bria, you have Maeda, we have Dr. Clamp, who's the bad guy, we have the Eve mitochondria lady, and then we have Aya's partner in the Force, and we have 2 supporting guys. We have, I keep forgetting his name. I want to say it's David or something. I'm just going to call him David for now because I keep forgetting his name. David's son, and then we have the captain of the Force. So technically we have like 9 to 10, give or take. There's a character called Kathy in here, but she's a minor character. Wayne. Yeah, there you go. Wayne. I forgot about Wayne. He's the guy you go to when you want to store items, when you want to upgrade your guns to add an inventory slot, like an ability spot, an attachment, so to say. You go talk to Wayne about that. So there's 10 characters in total that mean anything at all in the story, overall story of the game. Small cast. It's a very short game. It's 2 discs, though. But the reason for that being 2 discs is because they put the entirety of this nightmare on the second disc. There's barely anything on the second disc, okay? There's barely anything there except for the museum. And the museum isn't nearly big enough to put a whole disc to be worth the second disc. You could put the museum on the first disc, honestly. But they put it on the second disc because we have 77 floors of the Chrysler building thrown into that second disc. That's what's in the second disc. The Chrysler building. The entire 77 floors of Nightmare. Let me tell you. The amount of space, the big floors and all that stuff. Everything you do in the main story of all of the dungeons, from the Carnegie Building to the Central Park to the sewers to Chinatown to Soho District to the police precinct and the museum, the subway systems, all of these areas combined will probably not even amount to all 10 floors of the first 10 Chrysler Building in regards to ground covered. And you have 70 floors of this. So the bulk of the gameplay is going to be here. So if you're the type of player that requires variety, you're not going to find it in the Chrysler Building. Guns, for example, you have the strongest gun is like a fraction of what you can find here in regards to how good these guns can get. 70% of the weapons, basically, are in here. 70% of the best guns are in here. You have a physical weapon called the club. You can get up to club 3, which is the each club from numbered 1 to 7, I think. Basically means that the statistics, the parameters on that weapon go up. So club 1's the weakest, club 2 is stronger than club 1, but weaker than club 3. You can get up to club 3 in the main 6 days of Parasite Eve, the main story. You find 4, 5, 6, and 7 in the Chrysler Building. Most of your upgrades are in the Chrysler Building. Most of your tools and super tools and cards, trading cards that you can give to Wayne, that you can use to get a toolkit or a super toolkit, which is a non-disposable version of the tool and the super tool for your guns and all that other good stuff. Besides, all of that is in the Chrysler Building. Everything is in the Chrysler Building. So if you're just concerned with the story, though, I would just tell you to do the main story. I recommend the heck out of that. Play that, just do that, but only do the Chrysler Building if you're willing to go through all of that. Because most of the gameplay is here. It's just the dungeon is the same. It's that same piss yellow floor. That's your tile floor that you're going to be walking through. The same layouts, the same. You have a floor that's just straight this way. You have a floor that's just straight this way. You get a floor that's this way. You get a floor that's this way. You get a floor that's this way. You have a floor that's this way with a path in the middle that splits. You can have a 4-way intersection sometimes. It's just a series of Tetris block floors that you just infinitely pass through with very minuscule variation about them. You have to memorize the floors because they're randomized, and it's just a nightmare. I didn't appreciate it. There are some people who really enjoy it. I didn't. I personally think that you should have had a map for every floor, even if it's randomly generated each floor. The map can build itself with each room you go to. That way you can keep track of the rooms that you've been to. Because I kept finding myself backtracking through a floor, going back to the entrance to the floor when I was looking for a closet, or I was looking for the elevator. I kept getting turned around because every room looks the same. It's just and it's partially my memory as well. I could be going to there's a room with the closet. As I said, it's just a straight line room. It looks like that with a little door. Right, you can come in from this way, or you can come in from that way. Let's say you enter from this side and you enter into this closet. There's a fight in the closet. You fight in the closet, you pick up the items, and you get an item that's an upgrade item, and you use one of your tools to upgrade one of your items. So you spend a few minutes in this room. And then you come out, and then you forget if you came from the left or the right. And since every room looks the exact same, you could probably return this way and go through 4 or 5 screens before realizing, wait a minute, I've gone this way! And then you have to turn back around! It's just... I'm not a big fan of the Chrysler Building. It will test your sanity. It will test your patience. This place. It's not for everybody. But so if you want the true ending, look it up online. Just do that. But the main story, if I could just take the Chrysler Building and crumble it up, and just crumble it up and throw it away. If it didn't exist in Parasite Eve 1, and you just had the main game, I would rate it a 7.5 out of 10. I would rate it a 7.5 out of 10, mainly because it loses some points. It loses points on the analog support, mainly because if you go into analog mode, the menu navigation's also for the analog stick. You can't use the D-pad in analog mode. So if that were to be transferred into a PS1 version, if you plugged in a controller with an analog stick, it would be in analog mode. You would have to literally plug in a controller with just the D-pad to use the D-pad on Parasite Eve 1, to my knowledge. So that, you lose a point there. And you lose a point with how short it was. The game felt short because I guess they just couldn't come up with enough material to fill out a full 20 to 30 hour runtime. So they just added the Chrysler Building in to pad that out to give you a full 40 hour runtime. Because otherwise, it really does feel like a 10 hour game. And it's short for an RPG. You know, if you play Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, you know how long these games get. You play Xenogears, you know how long that game gets. For a Square game, for a Square JRPG, this feels too short. So if you wanted more story, if you wanted to spend more time with these characters, more locations, more dungeon variety, you're not gonna get it. Because the Chrysler Building is basically like 20 dungeons in one, but they're not 20 different maps. It's just one dungeon that is incredibly long. It could have done with a little bit more variety, I think. That's what loses it a point. But it is still a wonderful story with incredible characters, with great science fiction. There's some cutscenes, these CG cutscenes, that for the time, I believe it was like 96 or 97 when this game came out, there were some incredible cutscenes at the time. There's especially at the very start of the game with a rat. You could look up that cutscene if you want. But the way that rat mutates into the creature that you have to fight soon after, the way they show how this creature changes into an oblong, mutated, monstrous, gooey, horrifying visage is amazing for its time. And you honestly would probably think of The Thing, like John Carpenter's The Thing, in terms of its special effects type of way the creature changes shape. Even though it's not like practical effects or anything, it looks like a transformation from that movie transferred into PS1 CG, if that makes sense. It is incredible looking to witness, and there's quite a few transformation scenes. There's one with a dog in the police precinct level that is also incredible. There's one with a T-Rex in the museum that is incredible to look at. The visuals for the time period you can appreciate even today, especially if you were alive playing PS1 back when this was new. Even today, from now to now, I haven't played this game until just this year, and I can appreciate what it did retroactively, if I'm using that word correctly. I would recommend the heck out of Parasite Eve 2. I just can't recommend the Chrysler Building. I recommend the story, the main 6 days. I would demand of you to play those 6 days. I just cannot recommend the Chrysler Building. I just can't do it. I can't do it. But if you cut that aside, because that true ending of Parasite Eve 1 clearly isn't even canon anymore, because Parasite Eve 2 exists and the third birthday exists. You just need the main original ending, I guess, and you'll do fine. So play it. I definitely do. If you haven't played it already, play Parasite Eve. If you haven't played it, play it. If you have, play it again. I'm currently going through Parasite Eve 2. That's why this isn't a dual review, even though I spent some time to rant about the tank controls, because this was genuinely my first encounter with those type of limited tank controls. I didn't play the first 3 Resident Evil games. I have Silent Hill 1 on the backlog, but now that I have some experience with tank controls under my belt, perhaps I won't be as enraged with Silent Hill when I have to deal with those tank controls. Because clearly, I like full free-range movement. I feel like when you push your analog stick to the right, your character should move to the right. I feel like when you push your analog stick to the left, your character should move to the left. If you push your analog stick in a circle, your character should run in that circle. That's just me, personally. I feel like if you wish to rotate your character while standing still, you use the right analog stick to do this. That's just me. That's just what I feel. That's just how I feel about tank controls. Keeping it confined to a single analog stick when you have 2 just doesn't feel as expedient as using all of your button mappings as you could possibly do. But that's part of whatever. I haven't finished Parasite Eve 2. I'll come back to it, but I promise I won't spend a lot of time on the tank controls, because I spent some time on it in this one. I may even come back for the 3rd birthday, but that's Parasite Eve 1. Play it, but don't do the Chrysler Building.